All right, so I spent a lot of time with Russian propaganda, and I saw this article and I thought, you know what, we need to talk about it. This is in The Hill, the new Duranty effect. Russia's propaganda machine remains effective a century later. It's by two authors, Ulrich Wolkutz, I can't pronounce it, and Stephen E. Moore. We'll talk about them at the end. Russia's war against Ukraine has been accomplished by the rise of American propagandists repeating Russian narratives without question to their truth. This ranges from the false claims that Ukraine is a Nazi state to the ridiculous assertion that Ukraine persecutes Christians, like they uniquely are doing this. And this is like a Tucker Carlson kind of thing. The propaganda has caused real damage. Ukrainian ammunition and weapon stockpiles were depleted when Ukraine aid was stalled. The Republican members who have ingested anti-Ukraine propaganda and opposed additional aid will be on the losing side of this fight. Tucker Carlson is certainly the most prominent Kremlin mouthpiece. His 2-hour rambling interview with Putin was almost completely without pushback against Putin's insane claims, such as, why did Poland start the war on September 1939? Okay, so if you're going to be a journalist, and Tucker Carlson was saying, I have to interview Putin because I'm a journalist. Okay, if you're a journalist, prepare, have legitimate questions, push back, see what's really there, probe, find that out. But he wasn't trying to do that. He was trying to give Putin a platform. Okay, Vivek Ramaswamy echoed Putin's lies about Nazis in Ukraine during a presidential debate. He did. It was terrible. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, has falsely claimed that Ukraine persecutes Christians, even though it is Russia who's imprisoned, tortured, killed Christians in Ukraine. What Russia has done to the Christians in Ukraine is far larger than anything that Ukraine has done to the Russian Orthodox Church by limiting its access in Ukraine. There have been several instances of right-wing American political figures spouting Kremlin talking points, but this hasn't been just a right-wing issue. There's far left as well as far MAGA right. Code Pink, a radical left-wing group, has also adopted Putin's position, hook, line, and sinker, absurdly claiming that the U.S. supports Ukraine has largely been funneled to neo-Nazis. It's not. Where are the Nazis? Like if you asked during World War II in Germany, hey guys, where are the Nazis? They'd all raise their hand and say Heil, right? That's not what's happening in Ukraine. Where are the Nazis? I don't know. Where are the Nazis? I don't see any. Oh, you must be secret Nazis. No, that's nonsense. The Putin journalist lawmaker propaganda pipeline is reminiscent of propaganda from another era. There are several lessons that can be learned from another dark period of American so-called journalism, including the importance of truth tellers in a civil society, academia, and media stepping in to disprove lies, and they really need to disprove these lies. New York Times Moscow bureau chief Walter Duranty won a Pulitzer Prize in 1932 for his reporting from the Soviet Union, which covered up most of the famine induced in Ukraine by Moscow in 1932 and 1933. We're talking about the Holodomor, in order to suppress the Ukrainian nationalist movement. What Duranty described as a, quote, big scare story in the American press, and, quote, an exaggeration or malignant propaganda. Well, but not covering was also propaganda. It was just a passive propaganda. His coverage was later recognized for what it was, a misleading portrayal of the Soviet regime's brutal policies. By the way, if you want to see a great movie that highlights what was going on with the Holodomor, this movie Mr. Jones is worth checking out. Okay. We don't need to make the same mistake again as it relates to future aid for Ukraine. Allies of Ukraine and friends of freedom must push back against Putin's propaganda and ensure that truth defeats his fiction. The first big lie is that of a Nazi state. The truth is there's a thriving Jewish community in Ukraine, but that's not what they mean when they talk about Nazis. They mean nationalists, and they confound that. As anyone who is not supportive of Russia, they're nationalists. They're Nazi nationalists. Putin's revisionist history aims to conflate Ukrainians, and especially Ukrainian nationalists, with Nazi Germany. But today, nationalists mean something different than it did in the last century. In the 1940s, Ukraine nationalists were fighting to free their nation from the Soviets. But it must be recognized that in World War II, some Ukrainian nationalists were complicit in Nazi acts against Jews in Ukrainian territory then occupied by Germany. Similar tragedies occurred in nearly all areas occupied by Nazi Germany, and they must be condemned. But the Ukrainian nationalists and their organization of Ukrainian nationalists were not Nazis. It was and is an organization committed to a free Ukraine. Vovachuk, the Ukrainian nationalist leader, remember he's the guy that I talked about, I slaughtered his name on the way in, and one of the two authors is the grandson of Vovachuk. The Ukrainian nationalist leader who exposed the horrors of the Holodomor was honored by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. That's the Jewish stamp of approval for you have helped Israel, you weren't killing Jews, for saving Jews in Ukraine during World War II. The second big lie is that Ukraine is persecuting Christians. Ukraine is a nation centered on religious freedom and freedom of expression. In contrast, Russia has systematically shut down churches in Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine that are not associated with the Russian Orthodox Church, and has abducted, tortured, and killed scores of Ukrainian Protestants and pastors. Like, Russia has actually done the things that we're worried about Ukraine potentially doing. The rhetoric on one side doesn't match the actions on the other side. By overcoming Russian propaganda efforts to undermine international support for Ukraine, we can save lives and help ensure that Ukraine emerges as a free and democratic nation. Okay, so that was a great article. I talked about some of the propaganda points here with the Magna just got a big black eye yesterday, and the people that are involved, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others. I want to point this out too. Who are the authors? Yuri Vovachuk is a director of the Volk Foundation, the grandson of Ivan Vovachuk. Stephen E. Moore is the founder of Ukraine Freedom Project. He's a former Republican chief of staff in the House of Representatives, and he's been all in supporting Ukraine and working for Ukraine's freedom since the very beginning of the conflict. But you got to understand, like, what has been filtering from the Kremlin to American repeaters has really had a significant effect on the war. This would not have been taking 6 months to get to the $60 billion package if that was not filtering from the Kremlin, not directly necessarily, but at least in the talking points and that sort of thing through folks like Tucker Carlson and the Duran and Redacted and others, Doug McGregor, Scott Ritter, those folks. They are helping the Russian war effort in significant ways. All right, so, and again, what Tucker's doing here is really remarkable, because what he has as a platform, as a megaphone, when he talks, it's like missiles being shot over, as opposed to my channel, which is like shooting a little handgun in comparison the other direction. His platform is significant, and he's using it to magnify Russian talking points, and that's just scandalous. All right, thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.